Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the COCO, Center for Community Organizations, Law and Disorder videocast. This one's about board liability and nonprofits.
So a really popular topic, an important topic for board members of any nonprofit organization, looking to figure out what are their legal responsibilities and rights exactly. And it's a concern that's come up a lot, and we do some consults around this at COCO. And we created this info sheet that just sort of describes a little bit more what exactly a board member's responsibilities are. And so you'll notice that we're going totally through this info sheet as we do this video cast, and so you can just follow along. And you'll always find that there's a lot more information actually in the info sheet, so if you want to follow up or try to understand things a little bit more clearly. So,
well, I was going to just jump in.
Please.
What is liability?
Liability is a responsibility or an obligation in law. And you know, when I got to law school, I thought everybody kept talking about this word liability and being liable, and I didn't quite know what they were talking about. And I thought it was actually pretty ironic when I figured out that it was just this like fancy law word for saying you got to do something or you might be responsible for not having done something. Yeah, so it basically just means that somewhere there's a rule or there's a law that says you have to do something or you have to take care of something. And I'll go through the different types of liability. But before we go fully launched into it, Francis, I just want to talk a little bit about the investment of the legal industry and scaring people a little bit about liability. And so there's always risks that we face in life, you know, and right now, earlier we were noticing that our roof at COCO has a little problem with our ceiling with some leaks, and we thought, you know, will the ceiling fall because of the leaks? And probably the ceiling's not going to fall. And we can do our best to try to take care of it, to call the guy and say, you know, can you please fix the ceiling situation? But we don't want to overdo it with being scared and worried every day, as long as we take the basic precautions. And so I've seen organizations and board members get pretty frightened about the concerns of what could go wrong, and really worrying about that stuff. And I think we need to really balance our concerns about what could go wrong with making sure we do the social change work we're trying to do. We don't want to spend all our time worrying and not actually be able to do the important work that our organization is trying to do.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, and that's a real challenge sometimes in organizations, that some people are very concerned about liability issues, and particularly at the board level, we should have some concern, and other people are like, whatever. And so how do we navigate that path and think about what's some good practice that we can put in place so that it's good enough in terms of looking at it, but that we can stay focused on our work.
Absolutely, and so we like to talk about the idea of healthy practices, and at COCO we're pretty into this concept of public legal education. So people know their rights, they know their responsibilities, and then they can make careful, reasonable decisions about how to move forward. So we're not trying to say, forget about liability, because it's pretty important, and it's pretty important to take care of your organization. But just to always constantly strive for that balancing act between those two extreme personalities, the person who wants to worry every day and the person who never wants to worry.
So who could be liable in a nonprofit organization?
So in a nonprofit organization, just like in society, there are individuals who could be liable for their actions. The board of directors ultimately is only responsible if they didn't properly take care of the organization, if they acted negligently in some way. Otherwise, it will be the nonprofit itself that would be responsible. So there's a couple of different types of situations happening there. It's easier to talk through examples of liability. So with contractual liability, that's the idea that the organization signs a contract, and they, you know, let's say a soup kitchen signs a contract to buy some carrots every week for a year. And if they just suddenly stop paying for their carrots, then the organization itself will be responsible for the money owed. Now, will the board of directors be responsible? Only if they sign that contract with bad faith, you know, and bad faith, like really they never thought they were going to pay for it. They said, let's just mess with this business, or they were really malicious. But otherwise, it's the organization itself. And that's why we set up nonprofit incorporated organizations, because they're legal entities that are ultimately separate from individual people. So sometimes we get mistaken and we think because we've set up a legal entity, we don't really ever have to worry about liability. And we don't have to worry that much, but we do, as board members, have to make sure to follow certain reasonable behavior to make sure that as the directors of an organization, we take care of the organization.
Yeah. And so being aware of what contracts are in place is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then another example of liability is this concept of statutory liability. And actually, we all in our everyday lives experience this. So there's a statute, a legislation, a law somewhere that says you can't speed on certain highways, or that sets speed limits or parking rules. And that's just a statutory responsibility. Just a liability just means there's a law somewhere that says you've got to do something or you can't do something. So an example for organizations that they face a lot is if you have charitable status, you have to file your charitable information return every year. If you are an incorporated organization, you have to file your annual declaration every year. Otherwise, you could be liable. So what does that mean? You'd have to pay a fine. You might lose your legal status.
So again, being aware as a board of what are those statutory liabilities that exist is really helpful to know.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies that board members have and that boards have to make sure they know all the different responsibilities that are going on in an organization to kind of keep an awareness. And those are checklists. And we'll talk a little bit about that after. And then there's this idea of extra contractual liability, which again, in the first year of law school, I spent a long time saying, like, what does extra contractual liability mean? Is it like a super contract, or really an extreme contract that you sign with someone? And actually, extra contractual liability just refers to any relationship you have where you don't have a contract with someone, but instead you still owe them a responsibility. So if your mailman comes to your house every day, you don't have a contract with your mailman, but you do have a responsibility to make sure that the driveway and the stairs are clean so that her or him do not fall on the way up.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are, another example that's often used with community organizations and in general is this idea of the banana peel or the pool of water. So for days you leave, you're really annoyed with your coworker. I leave this banana peel for Frances to slip on, thinking, you know what, I told her to clean up that banana peel, and it's still there, and then she falls. It's like I should have been taking care of my coworker and doing the best, that I could, even though we don't have a contractual relationship between us. So it's this idea that in society we should take reasonable care of each other.
Yeah, and so that's one to think about in terms of identifying where there are those possibilities and putting in preventative measures around it.
Yeah.
Without getting too caught up in the ceiling might fall in kind of possibilities when it's rather unlikely that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's, again, I mean, a lot of those things that we just talked about are really about healthy practices or common sense ideas around just being reasonable, taking care, and thinking about, like, how do we take care of each other in an organization? They don't have to be framed always as these, like, legal responsibilities. If we think, our values say, I don't really want Frances to fall on that banana peel.
So let's look a little bit now at the legal responsibilities of the board of directors, because they are the ultimate decision holders in the organization. Yeah. So around liability, what are the responsibilities?
So I like to frame the legal responsibilities of the board of directors as the big four. And there's like really these four themes that you need to think about. And those are diligence, care, honesty, and loyalty.